So it's your birthday today?
It is. It is my birthday. 30,
July,
34 years young.
July. Oh, I was gonna say, are you legal drinking age now? Because
Finally, I finally can have my first legal drink.
oh, okay. Well, geez. So that wasn't us that had a beer together in Ottawa at the beginning of June.
We had to go across the river to Quebec because the drinking age is lower in
Right,
Quebec.
right, and it was just apple juice.
Yeah.
I remember specifically you ordered apple juice. Well, happy birthday. Thanks for
Thank you.
joining a podcast on your birthday. I would never do that because my birthday is the day before Christmas,
Oh, well, that's fun.
24th. It is actually. I've always enjoyed it because people decorate their homes. They put lights up on their houses. Towns will put like lights and like things on their main street and whatnot. So it's it's pretty special.
Your parents went back and forth. They were like, "Do we name him Mark? Do we name him Jesus? Do we name him Mark? Do we name him?"
Exactly, exactly. It's one and the same. No, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Another year that you're alive, so that's cause for celebration. So
Yeah, somebody lost the pool again this year. They're like, "Oh, he made it another year. I'm out."
uh well, maybe they'll start using you for live trap testing at Vegreville there.
That's
Here,
actually I'm away all of August. I'm in Vegreville.
Doug, stick your head in this box.
Fool me once,
Res-
shame on you. Fool
re-
me twice, shame on me.
research is showing that the head of a lynx is getting larger than it used to be historically. So you're about the right size. The test. Same same color fur as a lynx too.
Uh, that's why I get paid the big bucks is to stick my head in the box.
Exactly. Um, cool. Looking forward to the topics we got this show. So we're going to touch on the fur auction, the Alberta Rendezvous. Interesting story about Paul Watson. Everybody will know who he is. Some federal protections on the eastern Algonquin wolf in Ontario, and some updates on the FIC AGM and some awards that were given out. I'd like to hear about those, and maybe a little fun fact thing at the end to do with a river and a
Yeah,
seal.
little teaser for everybody. Stay tuned to the end. Don't fast forward. It's cheating if you fast forward to the end.
Yes, it is. So, June for auctions. What
Yeah,
what happened?
so June 15th to 17th was the second of this year's fur auctions in North Bay at Fur Harvesters Auction. You know, the where the world comes for wild fur. And I'd say that the results in the June auction were continued to be encouraging. Certainly, the March auction was really great. There was huge clearances and big jumps in price on a lot of items. But the June sale historically can be a little bit softer than the March sale. So it was encouraging to see how a number of items kept their value or stayed very close in value. Stuff like Fisher, stuff like Sable, Martin that the people trap, and lynx cats, bobcats, lynx, were pretty strong still in the June sale. And that's not to say that other stuff wasn't still strong, but those were almost exactly the same. There was a couple dollars difference. Beaver showed to be a little bit softer than it was in March. In March, it was 100% cleared, just about. Big increases in price on beaver in the March sale. A little bit softer. I think it was about 75% clearance on beaver in the June sale. Just pulling up, yeah, 75% clearance. Still solid prices compared to last year, but a little bit lower than they were in March. And there's been a big run on beaver the last couple of years. Prices have been strong. There's been big demand. So it'll be interesting to see how long that lasts. How long are we going to have big demand on beaver, both from the hatter market, where we're taking beavers, turning them into felt, making hats out of them, as well as the garment market. There is a lot of kind of pent up demand now in the garment market for beaver because it's been so hard to get your hands on. I hear from furriers and from fur manufacturers. They're like, "Do you know anyone who has some beaver that I can get my hands on? Because I'm hard up for beaver." And having to switch to other furs and say, listen, I'd love to, customers saying, I'd love to make you this sheared beaver coat that you're looking for, but I literally can't get the beavers right now. If you want to wait a year, I can get the beavers, but right now I can't. So that's helping people expand their horizons in some cases, and look at some options that they didn't necessarily look at before. So that's not a bad thing either. The wild mink was strong again in June. Was very incredibly strong in March. Huge increase in March versus last year, but still strong. There still is demand for wild mink as well. Particularly as production on ranch mink declines in certain parts of the world because of bans, and because of people getting out of the business and just not producing as much. And a little bit of encouraging movement on raccoons as well in the June sale. Still not where we would like to see a raccoon at. I'm not. I don't think that everybody and their uncle is going to be going out after raccoons because of the results of what we had in June. But for the folks that are out there trapping raccoons, it's nice to see upward movement. Hopefully that upward movement continues, and for 3 or 4 years, and then we can say raccoon is back. But raccoon maybe more so than any other item is really hurt by the sanctions on Russia. There was big demand for raccoon in Russia, and it's just not. It's not something that's as popular today in China or in Europe or here. I mean, my mother had a beautiful raccoon, like full-length raccoon coat, raccoon and silver fox, that she got in the 80s when everybody had a big something and silver fox coat. I think raccoon is great. It's just not necessarily something that folks seek out in North America or in Europe the same way that they do in Russia. So any positive movement on raccoon is good news. But I'm just trying to remember here. I got the numbers here somewhere on how many raccoon actually went through the sale. Yeah, so 54,000 raccoons went through North Bay in June. They cleared it at 92%. Which is nice, but that pales in comparison to the number of raccoons that were going through, North Bay and NAFA 10 years ago.
Okay, yeah. So the sanction on Russia is North America can't sell furs; they can't come here and buy them.
So the way the sanctions are structured is that you can't sell luxury goods, one of which is furs, into Russia if you're a sanctions compliant nation, or a country that has signed on to those sanctions, is the way I should put it. So there's certainly other countries that act as intermediaries for fur into Russia. That not to point fingers at any particular countries, but there are countries that are buying fur and then manufacturing goods in that country and selling those finished goods onto Russia. But it certainly is not the same as being able to sell product directly into Russia. It's a thing that I don't think. This certainly wasn't front of mind. I'm not saying it should have been. There were bigger considerations at play in building the sanctions regime against Putin and his buddies in Russia over the war in Ukraine. but it certainly has had a very negative impact on the fur trade writ large. You know,
Okay.
fur is a very globalized industry to a degree that I didn't necessarily appreciate until 2 years ago, getting into this job at the FIC. Um, that a skin may get sold at the auction in North Bay, get sent to get dressed in Cambodia, get processed in China, go to a dyed in China, go to a fashion house in Italy or Greece, and get manufactured into a garment, and then get sold somewhere else. So
Wow.
it's like any other manufacturing, it's very much a globalized industry. And I've been recently lobbying the Swiss government, because the Swiss are looking at banning fur. I think we talked about that a little bit on the last episode. Trying to impress upon the Swiss government of just saying fur from Canada is okay doesn't necessarily help us the way that we need it to, because that fur from Canada may go through 3 or 4 other countries before it gets to Switzerland.
Gotcha.
So we need that traceability. Whatever Switzerland does, there needs to be traceability involved in that. Otherwise, we may end up with a whole lot of Canadian harvested fur, Canadian trapped fur, or Canadian farmed fur that doesn't end up being allowed into Switzerland because it's gone through 3 or 4 other countries on its way to Switzerland.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and then that's all like you see that in other products too. Like for Canada, it's if if it's a wool product that's made in the United States, there's like a duty on it. Same with boots if they're made in the US, but if they're imported in, they can export them to Canada and there isn't the duty. Like there's just all these weird things, and it's like it applies to wool, but it doesn't apply to like denim.
Oh yeah, I don't envy the folks at like the Canadian Apparel Federation who have to deal with like all the different kinds of materials and all the different kinds of garments. I'm not going to say fur is simple, but it's a lot less complex than having to deal with fur and 15 other things,
Yeah, no,
uh, all
for
of which have
sure.
different rules around them, and different countries have different treatment of different products, and
And
it's a pretty tangled web.
Russia's a is it a pretty big supplier of furs? Like they have a big trapping industry, like in
Yeah,
Siberia and
so
whatnot. So can they not send their furs out of the country, or do they do the same thing? They are going through these different channels and getting around the sanctions, or
yeah, like I'd say in a lot of cases they're selling to other countries that have a different treatment of Russia in terms of sanctions. So,
yeah.
in that case it may be coming out through China, or coming out through Turkey, or coming out
Okay,
through
okay,
somewhere
okay.
else. Um,
And this is
because
just
they
fur.
are a
It's
major, because they are a major fur producer. I mean, particularly on sable, their sable being sable, not for all intents and purposes, it's a very similar animal, the European sable, and what we call the American marten,
hmm
but that we then market under the term sable. But it's certainly specialized, I would say. Like they're very much focused in on sable. They trap sable, they farm sable. There's also lynx trapping as well for Eurasian lynx in Russia, but not necessarily the diversity of furs that we see out of Canada and out of the U.S.
Okay, okay. Yeah, it's unfortunate because, it doesn't matter what's going on with Russia and the war. It's like there's still people living in rural areas that are trying to make a living, and like you said, in these other countries that are involved in the product chain, in the manufacturing chain and stuff. And it's just like your average everyday people that are hurt by this type of stuff when it's caught up in big politics, like something to do with the war. So it's like it's sad. It's
Yeah, I
sad
mean, and
for Russian people.
and it was unfortunate. I mean, for Canadian trappers, it was unfortunate that, at the time of all of these big conversations around, okay, we've got COVID, and then we've got these sanctions on Russia. The government took steps to soften the blow of sanctions on a lot of industries, and unfortunately, ours wasn't one of them. And we made a pretty big push shortly after I came on board here at the Institute. I was like, really need to like help government understand that this is hurting us. And it was kind of a sorry, that'd be a great thing to talk about a year and a half ago. Oh, okay.
Jeez. Any other big items that stand out from the fur auction? Was it well attended by countries? Like, is that looking good?
Yeah, so from my understanding, I wasn't in North Bay in June, but the my understanding is the auction room was pretty full. It changes depending on what's on the auction block. You get people that are there for one or two particular things, but the on the big in demand stuff like lynx cats and stuff, the room was quite full. In March, they set a record for like the highest number of buyers to ever be in North Bay. And in June, my understanding is the numbers were pretty consistent with what happened in March. So it's never a bad thing to have more people at an auction, and you get more interest, more demand, more people coming to North Bay for the first time, coming to Fur Harvesters, and making that a part of their swing, part of their annual travel is to make sure that they're in North Bay for the wild fur auctions. So it's all of these are encouraging signs that then hopefully will continue to pay off, literally and figuratively, as we go forward into this fall and winter strapping season, and hopefully there's a whole lot of fur in North Bay for next March's sale, and hopefully just as many people there trying to buy them as there were at this March's.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So, timing is really good because, people are probably starting to think about the season and get a little bit prepared and stuff. So, to have some encouraging news like this going into the 24-25 season, I think is a positive thing. So,
Yeah.
really happy that you're able to communicate that out to folks here.
Yeah, it's good news. So hopefully more good news to come.
Awesome. Now you've been traveling this month, this summer so far, and one of the places you were just not too far from me recently. You were at the Alberta Trappers Association. Was it the Rendezvous or their AGM or both?
It was the Rendezvous.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were like shooting your muskets and. You weren't legal to drink yet because that was a while ago.
That's before my birthday, so I was.
Yeah, it was before your birthday.
I was out of luck on that front.
So tell us about the Rendezvous. Like, Alberta is just so cool. The Trappers Association there is just amazing. They're so progressive. There's good people there, and Albertans are just they're awesome people. I just love the culture in Alberta that comes from that rural base.
Yeah,
farming
it was,
and everything else. And
yeah, it was a great experience. So I was out, as you say, I've been doing plenty of traveling lately. I'm in a weird window now where I have like no work-related travel for a month and a half, and I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. But now that I've said that, I'm going to get an email saying, "You got to go to wherever. You got to go to Fort Smith next week." But I got invited to go to the ATA's rendezvous. It was in Barrhead, which is about a half hour west of Westlock, which is about an hour northwest of Edmonton. So it was my first time really getting out of Edmonton, Calgary, and the Banff Canmore part of Alberta. So I was really excited about that, and I was invited there by the vice president of the ATA, Kevin Klein. He was at the BC Trappers AGM where I was, and he was like, "You got to come to ATA. Like, you got to come see what we do. We'll make sure you're there." So I got the invite, and I said, "Absolutely, I'll head out there." and it was a great couple of days. A lot of great events. Some very some very educational programming. They had folks from like one of the forestry companies that does work in and around trap lines there to explain how they approach logging and how they approach you know being part of the timber industry, understanding that they're part of a shared forest that includes trapping, and what they can do to help trappers, what trappers can do to help avoid issues with forestry activities. That was one I managed to pop into.
Right.
There was a couple other educational, knowledge building type presentations. I gave a presentation on the work that the Institute does on trap testing and certification, and on the government advocacy side and things like that. And there was some great competitions at the rendezvous. The speed skinning competitions were really impressive. The top time on I think it was the top time on coyote was 1 minute and 45 seconds.
Oh my goodness.
So it was really impressive to watch some of these guys that and I mean that coyote, that skin came off and could have immediately got on a board. Like it was perfect
Wow.
in 1 minute 45 seconds. So
I
that was
can't
really.
I can't even do a squirrel that
I can't tie my shoes that fast. Like I
Holy.
can't butter my bread that fast, let alone skin a coyote.
Jeez.
So it's really really great people. I was warmly received by everybody who was
Mm,
there.
mm.
Big thanks to Bill Abercrombie, president of ATA, for receiving me there and having me there, and sparing some time for the FIC. Minister Todd Lowen was there, and he's a trapper himself. He had I think it's 2 or 3 RFMAs, registered for management areas, in his own name, that he had to sign over to. I think it was his son or somebody else, because he's the minister now, and it's
Yep.
obviously a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
Uh,
Actually, any government employee has to, I believe.
okay, okay, I didn't know that. The
Yeah.
So it was great to see Minister Lowen and chat with him about some of the stuff that's going on in Alberta. We're actually bringing our AGM next year in 2025 is going to be in Alberta. So we're working with ATA on determining where and when that will be. It'll probably be sometime in June, but we haven't nailed down a venue, a location yet.
Okay. Okay. I'll have
And
to that'll be close. I'll have to look at going to that as
yeah,
well.
for
So
sure. And the kind of main event of the ATA rendezvous is the Beanbuster Challenge, which was something that was very much advertised to me in convincing me to come. And it's essentially like a fire building competition with with some theatrics associated with it. Of like, they have like a metal tripod stand where you put like your can of beans, and you build the fire, and the goal is you build the hottest fire the fastest, and like bust the can of beans, and it shoots off in the air like 100 feet in the air. And there was kind of a gauntlet thrown down by the BCTA, because the BCTA at their rendezvous, I think it was last month, they did their own Beanbuster Challenge for the first time. And they said, we're going to send a team, we're going to send the best and brightest of the BCTA over to Barhead, and we're gonna show up the ATA on their own turf. And sure enough, BCTA were the overall winners in the Beanbuster Challenge. So
oh, did they get did they get caught using drones to spy on the Alberta team though? Like I
the International Beanbuster Challenge Committee is examining the results at
uh
this time, but
yeah, sent
so
sent sent the coach home. Um that's funny. What was like, you probably obviously had a lot of, like, side conversations with folk there. what was the pulse of trappers in Alberta? What's on their minds that they were probably talking shop with you a little bit,
Yeah,
eh?
yeah,
Like
certainly.
what's the pulse
There's
of
there's a lot of interest from folks on the work that the institute's doing right now, particularly on wolf snares, and the work that we just completed over the last few years on coyote killing neck snares,
the
and
the the certification of components? Yep.
yeah, exactly, and the best design. So there was a lot of interest in when is that going to be the standard? Like,
Okay.
is that going to be the standard? Is government going to say you have to use these? To which my answer is that's a great question for the government of Alberta. We
Mm,
provide advice on this is the best design. But from there, and ATA, really in a lot of ways, the ATA and the work that Alberta trappers have done on snaring kind of led to us doing this work because there was a desire and an interest from trappers in Alberta to understand how they can be how they can be how they can be responsible and rely on the equipment that they're using and be able to say this is humane, this is safe, this is so
yeah.
they're Ross Inter from ATA, he sits on our trap research and development committee. Ross has been very, very active in that work. We have 3 members of my board are from Alberta. Corey Grover from Lights Out Snaring, Jason Parker, who's a trapper in the Grand Prairie area, and Dave Kay from Government of Alberta. They're all on my board. Alberta is very well represented on the FIC board. They have as many members as any other province. Ontario right now also has 3. Um, certainly one thing I heard from Bill, especially because Bill was at our AGM as well in Corner Brook, and Bill said, like, I want the trappers in Alberta to understand the work that the FIC does
Okay.
because so much of it goes on away from the spotlight that we need to make sure that people appreciate the work that the institute is doing, whether that's in Ottawa, whether that's in trap testing in the woods, field surveys, field research on killing X snares, whether that's at Vegreville or whether that's internationally. We want trappers to understand that the institute is out there doing work on their behalf. So,
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
really like being able to go to trappers associations, AGMs, rendezvous, campouts, whatever it is, because one, it's a lot more interesting than sitting behind a computer working on
Yes.
PowerPoints and Excel spreadsheets. Uh, but it also gives me a chance to talk to people that actually, the Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations that I do, often actually have an impact on those people's lives
Yep.
and their craft and their trade, and in some cases their pocketbooks. So it's helpful for me to understand what's going on out there, what might be kind of percolating under the surface before, I might hear about something a year before it becomes an actual issue that I have to deal with. And I go, wait, there's that guy I talked to in Barhead. I need to go find his business card or talk to Corey and find out his name and give him a call. So, it's really, really helpful for me, and at the same time helpful for the folks there to learn about what it is the Institute's doing.
No, and putting a face to the institute is a huge step forward in doing that. So that's cool. You will probably gain even more followers and be more revered and more respectful if you can be the bean blowing up champion next year at the Alberta Rendezvous. So I would
They're
say this time that you said you have back at home in the office and no traveling, you better get your bean busting skills.
Yeah, well, I gotta get in touch with Kevin. Kevin, if you're listening, I need one of the Beambuster tripods to practice on.
There you go. There you go. So super cool. Glad you got out there and look forward to the AGM in Alberta next year.
Yeah.
Interesting story here. Everybody's friend. Uh, so tell us about Paul Watson. What
Oh, Paul
happened?
Watson, Captain Paul Watson, the man himself. So for folks who don't know, Paul Watson is an activist who was involved in the early days of Greenpeace and Greenpeace's anti-seal hunt campaigns back in the 70s. He left Greenpeace because they weren't extreme enough, and went and founded the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, whatever they're called. Um, that oppose the seal hunt, they oppose fish farming, they oppose whaling, they do a whole bunch of stuff. Some folks may remember there used to be a TV show on Discovery Channel called Whale Wars, where they used to go and harass the Japanese whaling fleet with some of their vessels.
In in
They're
uh, in in the Antarctic.
Yeah, in the Southern Ocean.
Yeah, in the Southern Ocean. Yeah,
And
and the Faroe Islands.
and they've been to the Faroes to try
The
and
the
disrupt the Grind, and
the food harvest there. Yeah. Yep.
yeah, and they've been to Iceland as well. They got run out of Iceland, I should say. Uh, the thing that folks may remember Sea Shepherd for in Canada was in 2008. They had one of their vessels, the Farley Mowat, come into the Gulf of St. Lawrence during the seal hunt, and came dangerously close to sealers on the ice. And I mean, the Farley Mowat was a 120-foot vessel. Um, they weren't out there in a power canoe. They were out there in a pretty large vessel, and came very close to sealers on the ice. And honestly, it was just thanks to the quick thinking of the captain of the Coast Guard icebreaker de Grossier, who put the de Grossier between the Farley Mowat and these sealers. And there were some pretty significant collisions between the Mowat and the de Grossier. They arrested the entire crew. The entire crew were all from other countries, so they all had to be extradited. The Farley Mowat was seized from Sea Shepherd. It sat in Sydney Harbor in Cape Breton for a couple of years. It got sold for scrap, sunk in Shelburne Harbor, and brought it there. It's a whole story, but that was his kind of Canadian moment. He is Canadian. He's a Canadian
Yeah.
American dual
Yeah.
citizen. So as a
Even
result
going
of
back a little farther than that, just a little side story, a little closer, at least for trappers in the West. In the 80s, in northeastern BC, the government was undertaking a stone sheep program in the Kachika Valley, and they were doing prescribed burns up there, and Dr. Elliott was leading that. And then in the wintertime, they were doing wolf management. And Paul Watson got wind of this, got in the media, started making big protests about this. And he went up north, and he was going to go in and confront where this wolf program was taking place in the middle of the winter, like January, February. And I believe he either left from Watson, maybe like Highland Post or something there in just in the Yukon above the BC border, and was going to snowshoe down. I guess it would be the Kachika River, and snowshoe in to where Dr. Elliott, I think, was staging out of Scoop Lake Outfitters Camp in the Rocky Mountain Trench there, and then go in and wreak havoc on this. Well, it was just like, the north, and he's snowshoeing, and of course he's not like a mountain man or whatever, and got like 2 kilometers from the highway, and then there was all these like frozen feet, and anyways, the whole thing was abandoned, but it was just like this big kind of like
Oh wow.
media
I've,
shit show.
I've
So
never heard that chapter of the Paul Watson story. He was a long way
yeah,
from the ocean. That was his problem.
yeah, it had the water was too hard, I guess, so he couldn't sail up the river. But
Uh,
anyways, that's a Paul Watson story. So carry on. What's happened to Paul?
yeah.
Why
So
why are we talking about him?
yeah. So the reason we're still talking about Paul Watson 50 years later, as he long outstays his welcome in our collective consciousness, is he got arrested in Greenland the other day. The Greenlandic police, he was on one of his vessels. So he left Sea Shepherd a couple years ago. I don't know if it was he left, he got kicked out, but he now has his own foundation. He was on one of his foundation's vessels on his way to Japan because Japan has just launched a new commercial whaling vessel. And ever since, I think it's 3 or 4 years ago now, Japan left the International Whaling Commission in protest over over their whaling in the Southern Ocean, that they were getting ganged up on, and Japan said, all right, we're going to take our ball and go home, and we'll pursue commercial whaling within Japanese territorial waters, and that's it. Which, in many ways, echoes the position of Canada just 40 years later. We also are not members of the International Whaling Commission. We left in, I think it was 76, because we said, well, this isn't the International Whaling Commission anymore. This is the International Whale Conservation Commission, and we're here to have conversations about whaling, not about whale conservation. So that was Japan. Japan finally came around to that position as well. And they do pursue commercial whaling within their own territorial waters, same as Iceland does, same as Norway does. So as a result of some of Sea Shepherd's work, antagonizing the Japanese whaling fleet, there actually is an open arrest warrant for Paul Watson in
international,
Japan.
yeah.
And they've put out an Interpol red notice to all the participants of Interpol that, if you get Paul Watson, arrest him and extradite him to Japan. So they stopped in Nuuk, leaving assumedly somewhere in Europe. They were going to Nuuk, and I don't know if their plan was to come down and go through the Panama Canal, or they were going to go through Northwest Passage to get to Japan. But they had to stop in Nuuk for fuel or food or something. And when they did, the Greenlandic police got wind of the fact that he was on the vessel, and they put him in handcuffs and hauled him off the vessel. And he's sitting, as far as I know, he's sitting in a jail cell in Greenland. So he's awaiting his trial in Denmark, in Greenland, where they will decide whether he will be extradited to Japan to stand trial on the charges that he faces in Japan.
Yep. Yeah.
So
I saw some of those shows on the Discovery Channel, the Whale Wars or whatever it was, and yeah, he rammed ships in the Southern Ocean with Sea Shepherd ships, and I believe if you're the you don't even have to be the captain of the boat, I think, but if you're because they had a couple of boats down there, but if you're the admiral or whatever of the fleet, I think you're still legally liable for what your ships under your command do. And then they had people board Japanese vessels, and I remember a few things like that. So
he calls himself a pirate. And I mean, in a lot of ways, you're an eco-pirate or something equally pretentious.
Yeah.
But I mean, their logo is Jolly Roger, like a stylized Jolly Roger. It's a black flag with a white skull and crossbones, and I think a trident. But it's very much, very much like a Greenpeace aren't extreme enough for me. And this is like Greenpeace in the 70s. Greenpeace was getting, boats blown up by French special forces back then. It certainly wasn't the click on our website to fill out a form letter Greenpeace of today. And even then, he was like, "You guys aren't extreme enough. I gotta go start my own more extreme organization." But
interesting. Sea Shepherd was funded had Bob Barker from The Price is Right was a financial backer, as well as
Bob Barker, Martin Sheen, the actor.
Oh, really? What was the lady?
Bridget Bardot.
But yeah, that's it. Because they named a boat after her. So yeah, there was some pretty
big
money behind them.
Yeah, so they had all these boats named after people that had provided support to Sea Shepherd. So, there was the MV Bob Barker, the MV Martin Sheen, I think, is the sailboat that they may even still be using. They were harassing salmon farms in BC there for a little while. There was the Bardo, there was the Farley Mowat, and then I think the Farley Mowat 2, because the first one got seized. So it's, yeah, a lot of, and interestingly enough, I saw a news story of Bridget Bardot came out and was, decrying the fact that Paul Watson had been arrested by Greenlandic authorities. And my first thought was, oh my God, Bridget Bardot's still alive.
I didn't know that. So,
Like, I
I know.
legitimately didn't think she was still, like, she was, like, retired 50 years ago.
Yeah,
Like, it's,
I know. I know
you
the
know,
boat that had her name on it got run over by a Japanese whaling ship, that fiberglass thing, and yeah, I saw that episode. Well, we'll pick this story up again in some further episodes when we know what happens to Mr. Watson.
yeah,
So,
stay tuned for chapter 2. Paul Watson
yeah,
goes to Japan.
that's the ongoing saga. Anyways, I just thought that was kind of a almost like a fun story
Yeah,
for the older folks in the trapping and sealing community. They know darn well. They're probably a little bit of vindication there, I guess, probably,
yeah.
especially if you were a sealer back in those days.
Uh,
Now, moving on to wolves. So the federal government has listed the eastern wolf, the Algonquin wolf, under the Federal Species at Risk Act now. And it's mostly a species that's ranges in Ontario or fully in Ontario. And fill us in on that. I believe I saw an article where the Trappers Association in Ontario like submitted a formal objection to that. What's going on?
yeah, so the Environment Climate Change Canada has uplisted the eastern wolf, or what the government of Ontario calls the Algonquin wolf, um, from special concern to threatened. I think it was. It was already on the list, but it was low, and it's moved up a
Okay.
level under species at risk. So the eastern wolf, for folks maybe outside of Ontario and Quebec, is what has been now decided to be a separate species of wolf from the gray wolf. For a long time, it was considered to potentially be a subspecies of gray wolf, and then it was like, was it a separate species? Is it actually the red wolf from like southeastern U.S.? Is it a coyote? Is it some combination thereof?
Hybrid,
Um,
yeah.
is it just hybrids? So the official position of the broader scientific consensus right now, but I shouldn't say consensus, the broader scientific community, but not consensus, is that it is a separate species of wolf that lives primarily in and around Algonquin Park in Ontario, and potentially has a broader range from there throughout kind of eastern Ontario into western Quebec. The official position of the government of Quebec is that there is no such thing as the eastern wolf. That these are just, these are wolf genetics, particular wolf genetics, but does not rise to the level of deserving to be managed as a separate species.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
And
scientifically some scientists will refer to it as like an ecotype, not a
yeah, exactly.
subspecies,
Yeah.
but it's still like it's, let's just say, like it's the gray wolf. We have that in on the west coast on Vancouver Island. They're calling it the sea wolf, and
Yeah.
it's the gray wolf that's living on, on the coast and on Vancouver Island. And it's this thing in the scientific community where it's just it genetically it's the gray wolf. It's living in a marine environment. So what it does for a living, what it eats, how it behaves, the shape of its body, the color of its fur has morphed a little bit to adapt to the ecosystem, but it's not fully along the evolutionary lines to have actually split off. And scientists would call it a separate species or a subspecies. And the eastern wolf kind of seems to be the same debate.
Yeah,
Um,
so that was like, it was a big debate, I'd say around 10 years ago. There was like a really kind of furious debate around these wolves, and are they wolves? Are they not wolves? What kind of wolf are they? Um, Things seem to have kind of settled on that front, and it's that they are
yeah,
separate. The trick is they look like a coyote.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
are visually indistinguishable from a coyote. And that's one of the biggest issues with managing them is they're a coyote. Like if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and swims like a duck. Um, One of the biggest issues that's facing the quote unquote eastern wolf population is genetic interference from coyotes. They interbreed with coyotes all like nearly exclusively. Um, so you've got this like really core population of eastern wolves in the like deepest, darkest reaches of Algonquin Park. And as you move out from there, they become more dispersed, fewer occurrences, and higher rates of hybridism with coyotes. So it's really hard to manage something that looks exactly the same as something else. We run into this like in the fisheries world a lot. Like there's a lot of conversations for folks that are listening from the East Coast about redfish right now
Mm.
and the reopening of a commercial redfish fishery. Well, the problem is there are three species of redfish in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. They all look the same, pretty much. They school together. They live together, but they're genetically disparate. And at least one of those three species is a species at risk listed fish.
Oh, jeez.
At the same time as we're reopening a commercial fishery. So, that's the trick with trying to manage eastern wolves. So a few years ago, they're also listed and are listed as threatened in Ontario's Endangered Species Act. And as a result of that, the province of Ontario actually brought in some very significant restrictions on trapping and hunting. And it was basically you cannot trap or hunt canids in any of the municipalities that adjoin Algonquin Park. So it's like 42 or 48 municipalities that are around Algonquin Park that you cannot hunt or trap canids, period. Problem is, and this is what the Ontario Fur Managers Federation tried to get across in their submissions to the consultation earlier this year, and was echoed by the Institute, was if the biggest issue actually facing them now, because it's been I think 6 years since you've been able to hunt or trap canids in this area, and there isn't a significant change in population. And one of the biggest risks for this species is genetic intrusion from coyotes. You've just made it so we can't kill any of the coyotes that may be a problem here.
Yeah.
So if we just, unless there is for some reason coyotes will not enter Algonquin Park, which I don't see why they wouldn't. At some point, like these wolf genetics are just going to get bred out. Like
Yeah, so
the
the
way
the
that,
species will go genetically extinct. People think it's still on the landscape, but it's actually as a distinct species, it disappears off the face of the earth, and that's the genetic hybridization argument.
yeah, and the way that it's managed right now under Sarah and under the Ontario ESA is, that species are listed and managed as such under Sarah and under the ESA, as well as hybrids with 80% or more wolf genetics are
Hmm.
are managed as an eastern wolf. And now what I've heard from some of the kind of anti-use groups and seen from their submissions is, well, actually we need to start knocking that number down and start managing it as like 60% hybrids are also eastern wolves and 50%
S-
hybrids are also
So
eastern
then
wolves. And
the zone of no trapping, no hunting would expand in Ontario.
yeah, exactly. And
Hmm.
Quebec has done a lot of genetics work on wolves and coyotes and trying to disentangle what are wolves, what are eastern wolves, what are coyotes, what are hybrids. And very few examples of the genetics that are associated with eastern wolf like occur in Quebec.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, there are folks out there that I mean, Algonquin Park, like I lived in Ontario for 13 years. Like Algonquin Park has this like weird it is this weird cultural phenomenon for people that doesn't like I don't have an equivalent of that having grown up on the East Coast. That like Algonquin Park is greater than everything else in the world, and you can go there and like I like Algonquin Park. Don't get me wrong; it's a nice park. Um, but there are folks that like they'll go chain themselves to the gates if anybody were to ever do anything to Algonquin Park, and it's they talk about, well, it's important for tourism for Algonquin Park for people to be able to go and see these wolves. And I go, well, but you can't tell them apart from a coyote. Like if the issue is you can't tell them apart from a coyote,
Don't
just
tell
the tourists they're just tell the tourists they're a wolf. It's fine.
It's all in the marketing.
Yeah, but it's not even like, okay, well, there's trapping in. We're going to allow trapping in these municipalities, but we'll only allow the use of restraining traps so that then we can do selective harvest of coyotes. Because you can't tell the difference. Like
Yeah.
you need to send like a tissue sample away to a lab to do like DNA barcoding and figure out, is that a coyote, is that an eastern wolf, and leaving the wolf or coyote in the foothold trap for 3 weeks while you wait for your results to come back doesn't quite live up to the AIHTS. So it's very much kind of a like, I don't see what the end game is, and where I don't see what it is that can be done that leads to the resurgence of the eastern wolf. Just because from the literature that I've reviewed, I don't see the niche for wolves that is separate from, like, the ecological niche that's for these eastern wolves that's separate from the ecological niche of coyotes.
Yeah.
And there's more coyotes than there
know,
are eastern wolves.
and we know the coyote is just so adaptable. It's going to inherit the earth and
Yeah.
white-tailed deer. They're going to colonize Algonquin. I mean, geez, they live in cities and stuff, like, right? Like
Yeah.
it's only a matter of time. So like what you're saying is, if the end game is to preserve the genetics of the eastern wolf in the Algonquin Park, then there needs to be pretty extreme management of flow of coyotes in and wolves out, and protect that core. Or, like you said, coyotes are going to move in, wolves are going to hybridize. Before you know it, scientists are going to say that the pure genetic eastern wolf is now extinct.
Yeah, and I mean, like, and I am far from a geneticist, so, like, for if there's people out there who are listening who are wildlife geneticists and wildlife biologists that can explain to us, like, what is there is a way that we can make the eastern wolf return to being the eastern wolf. Well, great. It's just, to me, I'm curious as to whether this is one of those. Again, I'm not a biologist, I'm not a geneticist. I just listen to too many podcasts. But, like, people talk about mule deer, about, like, we live in a very particular and unique point in history because the mule deer exists. Because there will come a point in time where just white-tailed deer inherit the earth. And breed, and that mule deer are potentially the creation of a convergence of white-tailed DNA and black-tailed DNA over the course of millennia, and a million years from now there probably won't be any mule deer. Is that the same thing with the eastern wolf, that they had a niche when it was just them versus, like, full-blown gray wolves? But with the, introduction is the wrong word, but, like, with coyotes showing up on the scene from the southwest of the United States where they started, does that just mean that coyotes are going to outbreed, outcompete, are they going to do to the eastern wolf what we did to the Neanderthal.
Yep.
And
Yep.
again, I would love to talk to a biologist or a geneticist who says like who could actually like deconstruct that for me and help me understand a little bit better. But
Yeah. Yeah. It
um,
is because it is. I mean, it's getting into philosophical stuff, but it's like,
yeah,
you know, was let's just say pre-colonization in North America, where they, you know, the dominant canid in Eastern North America, and there was lots of them, and they've shrunk, or is this a little subpopulation that's trying to expand, and we just happen to be here, or like we don't know evolutionary wise, like what you're saying is which way were they going, and what course of action do humans play in either allowing them to expand and go back to what they used to, or are they actually on their way out? Like it's
yeah. I mean, and it's an answer. I guess it's a question. There's no real answer to, but it's kind of one of those things that we see government and the fairly blunt tools of the Species at Risk Act and ESA, and it's how do we apply those tools, or are those the tools that should be applied? It's very much particularly like the federal SARA is like so habitat focused and doesn't necessarily allow for, or at the very least it is a strange bedfellow to active management in a lot of situations. And
mm,
the places where we see active management in species recovery, like with caribou and wolf reductions, things like that, which now is kind of spreading across the country, having really started in BC, Alberta. We now hear that in Ontario. We now see that in Quebec. Um, what are the best tools available to conserve the eastern wolf? To me, there is habitat there. The problem is the habitat is starting to get filled up with coyotes. To me, the solution would be remove coyotes
mm,
and just play the numbers and just say like every coyote looking thing that ends up in one of these municipalities dies. Because at the very least, we know that in the deepest, darkest reaches of Algonquin Park, there are eastern wolves,
yeah, yeah,
and that they will never leave, barring some kind of cataclysm. They will not leave the middle of the park and come out into these municipalities. Like the last one won't.
yeah,
The
yeah,
last eastern wolf, the last Algonquin wolf will die in the middle of Algonquin Park.
yeah, yeah. No, yeah, but that's not what's happening right now, and trappers and hunters are being pulled back from that type of a protective strategy tool for the eastern wolf. So
Yeah, and I mean, and the thing I guess that we haven't talked about is, as a result, you have a ton of canids on the landscape that
yeah,
are predating on deer and on moose and on beavers and on other things that are important to hunters and trappers. So, I think it was Ray Gall from Ontario Fur Managers Federation was getting interviewed there, and he said in some of these places there's a 40% reduction in beaver population because there's so many coyotes on the landscape. And
um,
it's for all the talk that we hear from, when we go into Toronto, city of Toronto, we'll pick on Toronto because we can, because it's Toronto. God forbid you say that we should have lethal removal of beavers in the city of Toronto. That we need to put in place beaver bafflers and flow control devices and all these things, anything but actually trapping a beaver that's flooding a road. But they have no problem on the edges of Algonquin Park saying, well, just let all the coyotes go, and then the coyotes go and kill all the beavers.
yeah. Well, to some folks, it'd be like that's nature doing regulating itself kind of thing, and humans just need to stay out of the picture. But in this case, we don't. Well, we know coyotes have expanded in North America due to their relationship with people, and primarily their relationship to agriculture
Yeah.
has expanded them. But we don't know our relationship to the eastern wolf. So
Yeah.
there is really no more space, I think, in North America to say that humans just need to stay out. We're in some way, shape, or form having an influence and have a responsibility to kind of keep everybody happy out there. So,
Yeah.
but trapping doesn't make everybody happy, unfortunately. So in Canada, um, cool. Let's jump on to your AGM. And that the FIC had its AGM recently, and I'm particularly interested in hearing about some awards that were given out to individuals.
Yeah, so we had our AGM just around the end of June, a week after the auction, so it was 21st, 22nd of June in Quarter Brook, Newfoundland, Labrador. It was great to get out to Newfoundland. Been the first time the Institute's been out there with our AGM in like 15 years or something like that. So certainly lots of trappers in Newfoundland, lots of sealers in Newfoundland, who are very interested in the work that we do. We had all the exciting stuff, the reviewing of financial statements and passing of motions, and
Oh,
we
fun stuff.
yeah, exactly. So we had board elections and stuff like that. We picked up one new board member, a returning board member, Serge Lariviere from the Cree Hunters Economic Security Board in Quebec. So glad to have Serge on board. But we had a banquet with all of our members and members of the Newfoundland Labrador Trappers Association and some other folks, some invited dignitaries as well. And at the banquet every year, we give out, the FIC has a few awards that we give out to recognize individuals who've had a real positive impact on trapping and on the fur business in Canada and around the world. So the first award we gave out is the Lloyd Cook Award, which is associated with is awarded to folks that have had a significant impact on the actual nuts and bolts of trapping and hunter and trapper education in particular. So we awarded that to Frank Phillips from Labrador. Frank has been is a legendary name in Newfoundland and Labrador. He was involved with writing the first Trapper Ed manual in Newfoundland back in the day. So he's still to this day a very, very involved member of the trapping and sealing community in Newfoundland Labrador. So folks were very happy to have seen Frank receive that award. The next one is the Neil Jotham Award. So Neil, who actually unfortunately passed away a couple years ago, was a seminal figure in the creation of the Institute, and in trap testing and the idea of humane trapping, frankly. It might surprise a whole lot of people to know that, when Neil was involved in trap testing getting started in Canada, and then shortly thereafter the Institute coming into being, he was executive director of the Canadian Federation of Humane Societies. There was a time where what is now Humane Canada was a major part of trap testing and a major part of developing humane trapping before they kind of became more and more extreme, and now they're just anti-trapping. But so Neil's had a major impact on a major positive impact on trapping, not just here but also around the world. So we award this award each year to celebrate an individual whose work has had an important impact on animal welfare in trapping. So we gave that award to Ross White from here in Nova Scotia. I know Ross well. He's on the board of TANS, of the Trappers Association in Nova Scotia. Ross was actually one of the people who taught me my trapper ed last year. He was one of my instructors. Ross has been super involved for many years with TANS. He was a school teacher and a trapper here in Nova Scotia. He's still a trapper ed instructor, has been trapper ed instructor for decades. And he was very involved in around the time of when the agreement on international marine trapping standards was being negotiated in the late 90s, or in the mid to late 90s. There wasn't necessarily a formal presence for Canada's trappers in that conversation. It was a government to government conversation. So certainly there were some folks who were within the Canadian delegation who worked for government, who themselves were trappers, but they weren't there representing trappers. They were representing the government they were working for. So Pierre Canac-Marquis, who runs our trap research program at the Institute, back in those days was the fur manager for the Quebec government. He was in the room. But the trappers decided, different trappers associations were kind of conversing amongst themselves and said, well, we need to send somebody to, I forget if it was Paris or Brussels or wherever it was in Europe that they were having these negotiations. And but then they couldn't, they said, well, we're going to send somebody, but how are we going to actually pay for them to go? And it was, Ross played a big part in that conversation, and TANS played a big part in actually putting up funds to send a trapper's representative to be there. This guy was, who we're going to talk about in a second, was like in an adjoining room. So whenever there was like a break in the negotiations, the Canadian delegation would come into this other room and talk to Howard about what was going on in the negotiation room. And so Ross was a big part of making sure that Howard was there, not in the room, but in the next room over, to help influence the negotiations of the agreement. Yeah, with the glass up against the door, trying to listen. So that leads, I guess, an easy introduction to the next award, which is the North American Fur Bearer Conservation Award, and this is like the highest honor that the Institute really has, and it's really just to recognize significant achievement and significant contributions to trapping in Canada and to fur bearer conservation in Canada. And this year, where we were in Corner Brook, it was very fitting that we presented this award to Corner Brook's favorite son, Howard Noseworthy. So for lots of trappers who are listening, you may know the name Howard Noseworthy from Fur Harvesters. Howard currently is the director, I think, of business development for Harvesters Auction, but he was general manager of the Ontario Fur Managers Federation. He was, once upon a time, he was president of the Newfoundland and Labrador Trappers Association. I think he said he was 23 or 24 when he got made president of the NLTA, and was getting sent off to national meetings, international meetings. Howard eats, sleeps, and breathes trapping and fur. Like he's probably done as much or more than anybody to go and promote Canadian fur around the world. If there's a country where people buy fur, Howard's been there telling them that they should buy Canadian fur. And he was the guy in the next room over. So when the Canadian delegation was coming out at the break time, they were coming to talk to Howard and get Howard's input on what needed to be done, what should be done, what could be done, to ensure that the agreement was something that Canadian trappers could accept and could live with. So he's really got his fingerprints. He's not a name on, he's not a signatory on the document, but in the eyes of a whole lot of trappers around the country, he probably, his fingerprints are all over the agreement and all over kind of just where we are and where we have been as a trade for many years now.
Wow. Those are amazing awards. Like those are lifetime achievement level
Yeah.
awards, right? So it's it's good that you shared those out, because I think, for younger folks in the trapping community, like it's good to kind of know about, this history and these people and what they've achieved, because, some people step up and fill these roles just like they just do because they're that type of person. But then there's also people out there that, if they know, you know, um, there's an opportunity for you to step into some shoes and carry on. The old thing of like we're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Like, I think it's good for the younger trapping community to know about that, because there are roles like this that do need to have a continuum of people in the trapping industry that will be up there shaking Doug's hand after his 72nd birthday, and accepting these awards, right? So
Yeah, well, I mean,
uh
I think that both Ross and Howard, spoke to that point of like, we need to make sure that, there's another generation of Rosses and Howards and Franks out there. We haven't written the entire story of trapping in Canada. There's still plenty of time, and plenty of pages left to fill in that book. So
yeah.
for folks that are out there that are listening, um, that are thinking about how they can be involved, get in touch with your local trappers council, get in touch with your provincial or territorial association. You're going to do a whole lot of stacking chairs, uh, and all that fun stuff. Setting up the wood pile for the Beambuster Challenge. But those guys did too. 30 years
Yeah.
ago, 40 years ago, they did a lot of stacking of chairs. So it's really I have the privilege of getting to talk to these guys all the time.
Mhm.
Where when I'm trying to write something about the agreement and I go, well, how did we get to this point? I can pick up the phone and call Howard, or call Pierre, or call Ross and be like, why is it that in this section it goes this way? It's when I worked in my previous job with WWF and was working on stuff in Nunavut, I'd often run into stuff around like the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement and stuff that to me didn't make sense about the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement. But I also happened to work with Paul Okalik, the first premier of Nunavut, who was one of the negotiators on the agreement, so I could call him up and be like, Paul, why does Article 5 say this? Do you remember
Right.
how we got there?
Yeah.
Um,
That
I
history's important, boy. Holy.
Yeah, well, that's like I tease Howard and Pierre quite a bit. I'm like, I need to plug you guys into a computer at some point and like download everything it is that because there's no way for us to maintain all of this institutional knowledge. And losing Neil Jotham a couple of years ago was like a big kind of wake up call to a lot of us and going, wait, like there's some of these guys are not as young as they used to be.
Mm.
um we need to make sure that we have some of this knowledge passed down. And I mean, and it's the same thing with the nuts and bolts of trapping. The guys the old hands, especially when I was at BCTA, like the old hands there that have been trapping for 50 years, they know more about animal behavior than any university researcher ever will.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
just the incredible amount of human capital and institutional knowledge that we take for granted, I think sometimes,
Yeah. Yeah.
is pretty spectacular. So I
And that knowledge is on two fronts. It's on the skill, the trade, and the craft of trapping, and it's on the side of fur bearer conservation.
yep.
And those people generally have both of those things in equal proportions, and just straight from even from a species conservation perspective, if you're not a trapper, or maybe you don't even like trapping, these are the people that know fur bearers, that will first and foremost always stand up for their conservation and their habitat protection. So there's I think a broader vested interest in society to ensure what these people know can be preserved and passed on. So it almost sounds like one of those. Remember, like the National Archives of Canada and stuff used to have all these thing where they get these grants and go get these old films and
Yeah.
redo them and put them into the National Archives and stuff. We need, like you said, we need to do that with these individuals. So
So yeah,
it'll be
I would love to have a big government grant and go have like 3 hour sit down interviews with each and every one of these guys. Once upon a time when I worked for the Minister of Veterans Affairs, we were doing Historic Canada was doing the Memory Project, where they were interviewing all the veterans, the surviving veterans from World War II, because it was, we need this to get passed down. And it's one thing for them to have told their kids or told their kids who told their kids. Another thing for us to put a video camera, we have the technology today, put a video camera in front of someone and get them to talk about it.
tell those stories. Yeah.
So for folks that want to know a little bit more about Frank and Ross and Howard, we have a piece on Truth About Fur on the blog at truthaboutfur.com about the AGM and the awards banquet and the three guys that we honored there that evening.
Absolutely. That's cool. Yeah, thanks for passing that on. And next year, we'll look forward to see who the recipients are given at the AGM in Alberta, right? Cool. So, last story. Tell us what's going on with the Ottawa River.
So, the Ottawa River has a visitor this week. What appears to be a juvenile harbor seal is in the Ottawa River, like in the city of Ottawa, hanging out doing harbor seal stuff. And I got sent this by a buddy in Ottawa, one of my fishing and hunting buddies, and he was like, "Is this what I think it is? Someone sent me these pictures and these videos. Is this what I think it is?" I see that the people who actually were the original witnesses to this seal in the Ottawa have posted it on Instagram now, and so I'm sure that by the time this hits the airwaves, there are likely to be some stories on CBC Ottawa and whatever about this harbor seal. Once upon a time, seeing a seal in Ottawa was not an uncommon occurrence before the dams got put in on the St. Lawrence and further up the Ottawa. But today, I don't know. I lived in Ottawa for 13 years. I never heard of a seal being there. I don't know when the last time there was a confirmed sighting of a harbor seal in Ottawa was. But there used to be populations of seals even into Lake Ontario. There was a relict population of harbor seals. So, we shot them all. In the 18th and 19th centuries, they got killed. Is why there aren't any today. But
and then physical barriers put in place.
And then physical barriers. So above Niagara Falls, there was a relict population that was landlocked to Lake Ontario. But even since then, it wouldn't have been uncommon once upon a time to see harbor seals coming up the Ottawa. And just one of those interesting, like, you're not supposed to be here.
Yeah, that's cool.
So, I'm sure he's having a great time hanging out, eating carp and walleye and all kinds of stuff that he doesn't get out in the Gulf of St. Lawrence.
Less competition too, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Just him versus the muskies is is the only thing. But so that was my kind of interesting social media sighting of the day is the harbor seal hanging out in Ottawa. We always joke about when folks on the East Coast were talking about seal hunting and how seal predation on fish stocks is a problem, and if we could just send some seals to Toronto and Ottawa, then they'd understand. Well, seals are doing it for us, I guess.
Yeah, they're finding a way. No, that's that is interesting. So we'll see maybe if there's this one's by itself or if more to follow and kind of what happens and we'll report back. So if anybody knows of any stories like that where things are changing and showing up where they didn't used to be. I know last year there were some stories about beavers working their way into like the basically like above the Arctic Circle,
Yeah.
starting to get up into there. And that was a concern for folks. And it, like as a negative impact on the landscape. And then the whole thing with our conversation about the Algonquin wolf, it's like, well, what's natural and what's not? And, were they there before and all this sorts of stuff. But I know originally they weren't being looked upon too favorably because of their willow consumers. So
Yeah.
everything else up there that depends on willow, the beaver was now becoming competition for them and changing the landscape. So yeah, those are the two I've heard of so far. So I don't know if there's folks know of other things out there that are
Yeah, I'd love to hear
changing.
what folks are seeing. I hear stories about wolves on Newfoundland. I hear stories about moose in northern Quebec above the tree line. It's how much of that is fact versus fiction, I don't know, or fact versus imagination maybe is probably a better way to put it. But who knows? There's nature's always changing. In some ways, in some cases, it may be nature returning back to the way it used to be.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
possible. Just
And in some cases, we see that, here on the East Coast, every once in a while, there's like a beluga or a narwhal will show up, or a walrus floats south on an ice floe. And it's like, well, no, we used to have a population of walruses in the Gulf of St. Lawrence,
yep,
and
yep.
Bay Fundy. We were talking about species at risk stuff before. Those are my favorite species at risk. Management plans is management plans for extinct and extirpated species. Because like there's a species at risk plan for the like Atlantic walrus population in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. There's a species at risk plan for the brown bears in northern Quebec that haven't been there in 120 years. Um,
Wow, wow.
yeah, there's a couple interesting ones there where it's like if they ever could potentially come back, this is what we would do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh well, you never know. They're trying to bring the mammoth back to life too. So if anybody's going to send us any stories, don't send us any anonymous Sasquatch stories of new sightings or whatever. I'm not sure. If you want to put your name to it, that will make it more legitimate. But anyways, great episode, man. As usual, you're a wealth of knowledge. You're on the pulse of what's important to fur harvesters in this country, and you're on the pulse of this country and internationally. So I love our time together on this show, and hope folks do as well. So, any final thoughts other than what the heck's going on for the rest of your birthday?
My thoughts are on cake and ice cream
There you go.
right now, and for folks that want to stay up to date on what's going on, between episodes of the podcast, you can find the Institute on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, I think we're on LinkedIn even. And yeah, we're trying to have some more interesting content especially on our Instagram account. So if folks want to check that out, they can find
Yep,
us at Fur Institute of Canada.
absolutely. I'm following everywhere and seeing lots of cool stories from all over the world, actually. So appreciate the work you guys are doing. And thanks. We'll see you in the next episode.